Are we live?
I'm live.
I'm live too. So I guess we're here.
Hello, Stephen King.
Hello, John Grisham. How are you?
I could not be better. Everybody's safe and healthy, and that's a lot these days. How about your gang?
Everybody here is okay. So far, so good. Anyway, it's a pleasure to do this, and we're doing it to support an outfit called BINC, not BINK, but BINC, and it's the Bookseller Industry Charitable Foundation, which is a mouthful, but what it really means is they support bookstores. And how long would you say this outfit has been around, John? You know more about it than I do.
I think it's about 25 years, and it's they support bookstores and bookstore employees who are going through difficult times and normally don't have a lot of benefits, and so it's a wonderful organization to support independent bookstores and their employees. And these days, they need a lot of support.
Yeah, I understand that there's going to be a link for viewers who've signed up for this thing. And if they want to give a little bit or if they want to give a lot, what it goes to is to support independent bookstores. And I know that I'm from a small state, I'm from Maine, and we have one small bookstore in the town of Bridgeton, Maine. And they're kind of closed up right now. They're doing curbside service and they're doing whatever they can do to stay open. And you said that you'd had to sign a lot of books lately.
Yeah, quite a few requests from bookstores to sign book plates or books to try to help, and I'm happy to do so. I sign a lot of books year round anyway, and always happy to do that for stores. And like here in Charlottesville, we have a number of bookstores, but they're all closed up and doing curbside and with reduced staff. And it's really going to be tough to hang on. These stores don't make a lot of money when times are good, and right now it's not good. It's important for those of us who love books and bookstores to buy books, not just Stephen King and John Grisham books, although we prefer those to be at the top of the list, but all books. Buy books. Support your local bookstores right now. They need you, and we need them to stay in business.
Yeah, I know. The thing is, there are so many writers who are not in our position. They're not John Grisham. They're not Stephen King. Um, they're people who really, really need that. A lot of them don't have writing as their day job. They may be teaching school or doing something else, and it's a tough gig. And we know that there are certain big companies, we don't necessarily have to name them, where you can mail order books and get them that way. But the independent bookstores, to my mind, are the intellectual lifeblood of America. And that's very important now. And so, man, I hope that this will help. This
Yeah.
will help. I got a bunch of books coming tomorrow. I've got like 12 cartons of books that I'm supposed to sign. And it's not something that I, look forward to necessarily. It's a little bit like when you're in the third grade and you get caught throwing erasers, at the kid in the back row, and you have to write, "I will not throw erasers" 500 times. Only this is 500 times with your name, and but at the same time, it's going to help a number of these little guys. I hope. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. I went to a number of bookstores 3 years ago, toured for the first time in many years with Camino Island, and I went to 25 bookstores, I think, independent bookstores, most of which I'd never seen before. And it was a wonderful experience just to be in a different kind of bookstore. I love to go to bookstores and hang out, and because they're all so different, they have different personalities. They're big ones, small ones. Most of them are pretty small, but there's just something special about being in a bookstore. I love to pop in a bookstore when I'm traveling and first of all see how many Grisham books they have, and if
Of
if they have
course,
none,
of course.
I assume they've sold out. That's what Renee always says. They've sold out. But if they have some, I'll pick up the whole stack, take them to the cashier, and autograph sign them before I leave the store. But I love to hang out in bookstores, and I plan to go to some when all this is over.
You know what? We talked the last time that we were together. We were down here in Sarasota, I think. I was driving you back to the airport, and you raised this idea about almost like a stealth bombing run to a bunch of bookstores that we go around and we just pop in and sign all the books and meet people and shake hands and then buzz on out of there. That would have been a cool thing to do.
It was a great idea, but we never did it. Now
Not
they're
yet.
closed. so, so,
Yeah,
so that's something we'll do in the future.
yeah, we
You
will.
toured one time on a motorcycle, didn't you?
I did. I went around to independent bookstores at a time when I think that there was a lot of worry that the independent bookstores were under siege from not just the chains, but from the ebooks.
Right.
And so they said, "Would you tour for this book, Insomnia?" You know, it's one of my doorstops, John. You know about those, don't
Oh, I
you?
know. I remember that book very well. It's 1,000 pages.
That's right. There was a review one time of a James Michener book where the critic said, "I have two pieces of advice for you. The first is don't read this book. The second is if you do read it, don't drop it on your foot."
Yeah. Well, you got a
So,
bunch of those.
yeah, I did. Anyway, they said, "You want to tour and go to independent bookstores?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do it on my motorcycle." So I started in Maine and did a store there and went across the country, kind of did whistle stops and wound up in, I think it was Santa Monica, California. That was a great trip. Great trip.
Do you tour now?
Uh, the last time that I did a big tour was for End of Watch, and again, I said to these guys, the people, you know, they want you to go to the Seven Sisters. They want you to go to the big cities. You know, they
Right.
want you to go to New York. They want you to go to Washington, Atlanta, Miami, Chicago, LA, San Francisco. And I said, let's go to some smaller venues. Let's go to some places where people ordinarily don't go. So I went to Oklahoma City, where I'd never been before, and Dayton, Ohio was another place. And you know what? They were so happy. I mean,
Right.
I think the thing is like they would have been happy to see anybody at all. You know, they would have been happy to see, I don't know, I don't want to mention any names, you know, but
Yeah.
it was great anyway because I got to be a big fish in a little pond. It was wonderful,
Yeah.
wonderful.
I stayed away from the big cities for the most part. I went to Wichita and Asheville, North Carolina, and Raleigh and Greensboro, and I always go to Oxford Square Books there, and
Oh yeah,
Lemuria and Jackson, and but I think you have bigger crowds and more enthusiastic readers in the smaller venues because smaller towns because you're right, nobody goes there and they love to see you.
they love it. They absolutely do, and it made me really happy to go to those places. And you know what? I got a lot of stuff that I ended up using. You know, writers are pack rats, and when I went to Oklahoma, I said, I want to set a book here. I really like this. And so I ended up setting The Outsider mostly in Oklahoma. I made up the city where the thing was supposed to be set, but I had the feel for the place. You know, you don't want to go too deep into it because you screw up, the locals know that you're not from there. But if you just kind of use a light touch, you can do it. Listen, do you have a favorite bookstore?
Square Books in Oxford. That's my home store. I lived there for 4 years. Even before I moved there in 1990, I had been going to that bookstore for many years for signings during the 80s. And uh, when The Time to Kill came out in 1989, there weren't too many stores that would have an unknown writer, first time novelist publishing a book that by a publisher no one ever heard of. So most of the doors were closed, but there were five stores in that area, Square Books in Oxford and Lemuria, Jackson, Burks in Memphis, Reed's in Tupelo, and a bookstore in Blytheville, who not only welcomed me into the stores, but really we had big signings. And so when the firm came out 18 months later, suddenly everybody wanted me in the stores, and I didn't want to travel that much. So I started going back to those five stores for probably 10 years. And then stopped touring for a long time. But Square Books is, still it's something special. The bookstore in Camino Winds. This is a segue into my latest book, which you're going to have to do two in a minute.
You should absolutely do that right now.
Camino Winds came out yesterday, a week after you came out with If It Bleeds, which is a great title, If It Bleeds. But Camino Winds is a sequel to Camino Island, which is about a bookstore in a fictional town in Florida on a fictional island, and a lot of writers and booksellers and rare books, and no lawyers anywhere in the story.
Oh man,
So
that's a great thing.
all right, I plug my book. Now you plug your book.
Well, my book is called If It Bleeds, and I'm trying to think if there's any bookstores in it. I guess that there aren't, but it will be in bookstores. It's in bookstores now. Unfortunately, nobody can go in bookstores, but the anchor story is a short novel called If It Bleeds. It's from the old newspaper saying, if it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
And for years, I had an idea. I'm watching TV and I'm noticing that the lead story on most of the local news was some horrible tragedy. There would be a triple death in a car crash, or there would be a line of cars that all crash into each other. A guy goes over the bridge, or there's a double murder or something like that. And it seemed to me that I thought to myself, well, geez, the reporters who cover this thing are sort of living on gore, And I thought, what if one of them was sort of a vampire and could live just basically eating the grief and the sorrow and the pain from these things, which in a way is kind of like, the tabloid magazines in the supermarket and some of the things. There are people who actually do seem to live on that. I don't want to mention any particular names, but so anyway, I thought to myself for a long time, I got this story, I'm going to have a reporter, he's going to live a long, long life, and he's been around, and he just keeps reinventing himself, and he covered the big TWA crash in New York in 1960, and then he was there when the Kennedy assassination happened, and he's there with these tragedies, Pulse nightclub, and all these other things, and finally, he gets to a point where he gets impatient with just covering tragedies that happen, and he starts to cause them. And I had the idea, and I didn't have, how you have a novel and you have sort of an idea, but you got to have a transmission like in a car to make it go. And I had this detective from the Mr. Mercedes books and The Outsider, Holly Gibney, that I love, and I thought I'll put her in the book, and boom, there it went. Yeah. So I thought it was a little too short to be published on its own. It would have been cheating readers. So what I did was I had 3 other longish stories, and I put them in there, and it makes a pretty good sized meal.
I was going to ask you about that. I've never written a novella. I'm not sure what that is. It's something longer than a short story, and I guess not long enough for a novel. I have one collection of short stories.
Yep.
Came out 10 years ago. There are 7 stories. They're all long. They're too long for short stories, and I'm not real good at short. So I'm too long-winded for short stories. You are very long-winded, but you write a lot of short stories.
Well, I haven't written as many as I used to, but every now and then I do, and I do it because the discipline of the form, where it has to be so many words, is a really tough thing. But the funny thing about that is that the second story in If It Bleeds is called The Life of Chuck. And I wrote a story called Thanks, Chuck, and I didn't feel like it was complete. So I wrote 2 other stories about Chuck Krantz, the main character, and called it The Life of Chuck, and it makes a nice little novella. But I agree with you, John. It's such an ungainly form, the novella or novelette. Nobody even knows what to call it. But it's too short to be long, and it's too long to be short. So every now and then when one of these things comes up, I write it, I put it aside, and, I wanted to ask you more about these Camino books. One of the questions that we're supposed to have is, have you ever written a sequel, or have you thought about a sequel? Somebody says here, let me ask you this one. You can give the answer you gave when we were getting ready to do this. Hi, John Grisham. I wanted to ask you if you would please write a sequel to your book, The Client.
No,
No,
it's a
but
sta-
you did write a sequel to Camino Island.
yeah. It's, you know, what's different. I've written. I got a kids series with 7 books, so that's a series there. I guess they're sequels. They're all about the same characters. Camino Island. Well, the Camino Winds is sort of a sequel, although it has a different plot. You got
Uh-huh.
to have a different plot.
Does it have the same characters?
Yeah, mostly the same characters. When I finished Camino
Sequel.
Island three
John,
years
it's a
ago,
sequel. John, it's a sequel.
okay, if you
Got the
say it's a
same
sequel, it's a
characters.
sequel. But I knew I would go back to Camino Island for more stories because I really like the place. I like the characters. I like getting away from the law and writing about books and bookstores and booksellers and rare books and thievery and the rare that kind of stuff. And I've always wanted to write a true murder mystery. And so Camino Winds is a story of a writer who lives on this island, and he the day after a hurricane they find him dead, a massive hurricane, and his friends realized that he did not die in the storm. He was murdered, and so the police are too busy to investigate the crime. So
Because they got all the hurricane stuff they got to do,
we got all
right?
the hurricane stuff there, and small town guys anyway. And so our hero, the bookstore owner, Bruce Cable, and a couple of buddies, they have to solve the crime. So off they go like the Hardy Boys, trying to solve the crime of who killed their buddy, and that's the whole story. It's a murder mystery.
It's a beautiful thing. So you've got a kind of a wide range. You know, for a guy who's supposed to just write about lawyers, you wrote a book about World War II. That's fabulous. The Reckoning.
Thank you. Well, yeah, it was not a legal thriller. It came out a couple of years ago, and it's set in Ford County, my fictional home, where Time to Kill was set, and Sycamore Row, and a couple of other books. It's the only book I've written where that took place before I was born. It took place in World War II, and so that was a real challenge. But halfway through, the book takes a hard left turn and goes off to World War II. And I didn't really anticipate spending that much time with the Bataan Death March, which fascinates me. And so the book got to be pretty long, but it was I think one of my better efforts. What are you writing now?
Well, it's funny that you would ask that because you know, I've gotten this reputation as Stephen King, the king of horror, and I have written a lot of scary books. But like you, we must be getting old, John, because I thought to myself, you know, I got this wonderful idea for a novel that's a straight crime novel where the main character is a hired assassin. And he's hired to do a job, and everything follows from that. So, you know, please God, it gets done. I never know they're going to get done until they get done. Do you feel like do you feel really confident that your work is going to get done when you start something? Do you ever run into a blind alley and just put something aside?
This is where we disagree. We've had this conversation more than once about how we write, and we write very differently. We write a lot. I think your goal is 2,000 words a day. Used to be.
Not anymore.
Huh?
If I do 1,000 a day, I'm happy.
1,000 a day is a good day for me. That's 3 or 4 hours, and after you do that, your brain's mush, and you got to take I got to take a break. But
Yeah.
I believe in outlining. One of my rules is, don't write the first scene until you know the last scene. And
No.
I knew that. I knew that. We
So,
differ.
did you used to unwrap your presents on Christmas Eve? Did you used to look in the closet and see what you got? Come
No.
on.
I talked to I met John Irving last year in Toronto. John Irving says he writes the last sentence before he writes the first sentence, which is, I'm not that smart. But I know where the book is going when I start, and I don't start until I have the complete story. So I've never had a situation after writing 40 something books of just hitting a dead end and not knowing where to go. And, writers are famous for doing that. You approach it differently.
Yeah, I do. I usually have an idea of what I'd like to do. I have a situation. The characters sort of come on stage one by one, And I have certain incidents that I feel like I have to write, so I pull toward those incidents, one after the other. But and I a lot of times I have an idea of how the book is going to end, but it rarely turns out the way that I thought it would. I think that a lot of times some of the twists have surprised readers because I didn't know they were coming either. I can remember I wrote a book called Cujo, and I took so much grief about that book. People would write me letters and say, that this is a spoiler, but on the other hand, the book is like 40 years old, so
Yeah.
how much of a spoiler can it be? They'd write me letters and say, how could you possibly let that sweet little boy die in that car? And my response was, I didn't know he was going to die. He died. And then, you know, I could have changed it and made it happier, but I felt like that would be cheating the way that I saw things play out in my mind.
Okay,
So,
but do you, since you're not sure where you're going when you start, do
mhm,
you often get to a point to where you're not sure what's going to happen next?
yeah,
Do you hit a
yeah.
wall?
Yeah, I won't say that I hit a wall because I usually write through that. And you know, to me, John, the computer, do you write on a computer or do you
Yes.
write longhand? You write on a computer.
No.
Well, I do, and I used to write because I didn't trust the medium. I'm a kind of a mossback, kind of a Luddite, whatever you want to call it, old crank. But I used to, because I didn't trust the computer, I always thought I was going to lose stuff. It was going to go to data heaven. So what I would do is I would write that day's work and print it out, and I don't do that anymore. And I love it because it's like, you know, what the movie people say about editing in the camera, everything stays liquid. So I've got a character in this story where I thought to myself, you know, she's okay. She's like 21 or 22, but I want to make her younger. So I didn't have to rewrite all those pages or reprint those pages. I could just go back in the computer and make her a little bit younger.
Do you,
But look, I want to know what I'm gonna do tomorrow. I don't care about next week or something.
do
Does that make
you
me a better
are
person?
you online when you write, or you're offline?
I'm sorry?
Are you online when you write?
Oh man, the thing is, I don't know how to turn that stuff off. Do you have a little strip at the bottom of your computer that has like email and instant messages and stuff?
Yeah,
Yeah, and do when they pop up, does something go ding and a little number, a little red circle appears?
I think so.
Yeah, well, a
Where's
lot
this
of
going?
times when that happens, I think to myself, well, maybe I ought to look and see what this person wants.
No, I work on a computer, but it's not online. You know, I've read stories of writers who get hacked and their stuff gets stolen. So I'm terrified of writing online. It's all offline. In my writing space. In the house, I've got a laptop that I do all my work on. I mean, all my correspondence. And then when I finish the book, Steve, I still print every day's work
Workout?
as my backup. And then occasionally I'll back up the whole thing with a thumb drive, but I'm terrified of working online. When I finished, excuse me, I'm drinking La Croix lime water here. Excuse me. What are you having, Steve?
I'm having La Croix. It's cranberry raz.
Hmm.
So, yeah, and we didn't get paid anything by this company to do the promo.
Hey, I have a very specific question only you can answer.
Uh-oh.
For years, when you published a book, in the beginning of the book, like past the half title page, there would be a listing of all of your prior works.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure what that page is called, the credit page. That's something I don't know.
yeah. The ad card. I think they call it the ad card.
I've never heard that term. Anyway, I used to look at that when I when you'd send me a book, and Steve, you always send me a book when you come out, and I always send you one of mine,
Yep.
and that we enjoyed doing that. Um, but I would look at the
I got them all on my bookcase. They go chronologically from early on, although I only have a paperback of A Time to Kill.
Well, I was putting yours all on one shelf, and the books were so damn heavy the shelf broke
Oh,
because the books are
God.
so they're doorstops. Anyway, you used to list all of your works, your prior works, and it was impressive.
Mhm.
And I used to think, I wonder if I'll ever catch him. And I realized I wasn't going to catch you. And then at some point, when you had over 50 books, you stopped doing that.
Yep.
And I've got like, I don't know, 42, 43. It's almost like showing off. Like, hey, look what I've done in the past 30 years. I'm kind of ready to stop it.
Well, when you say I don't do it, uh, the publisher just stopped doing it. Scribner's publishes my books, and they don't do a page anymore. Maybe they think that there's too much stuff on there, and I don't really know, but I've never really minded that they don't, because yeah, it's a little bit embarrassing to look at all that stuff that I've done. And I don't think anybody, look, you know, if somebody wants to find my books, they can find them. They can either go online and order one, but you know, what I would like people to do is to get in touch with their local independent bookstore and get them from them and get them to bring them out to the curb. I mean, concierge service, what is better than that? So, you know, so they're not listed on the books, and that's okay with me.
Okay, another technical question. How often do you update your author photo?
Uh, I updated it on the last book. I think it was the Outsider, and a good friend of mine, somebody who grew up and went to school with my son. You know, it's crazy, isn't it? I remember when your kids were little, and I remember when my kids were little, and one of my older son's playmates is now a great photographer, and he took that picture, Shane Leonard. So I really liked it. And I remember, you know, the stir that your first author photo caused, because you had a little beard scruff there, and you looked kind of ruggedly handsome, and that was a fabulous picture. And you had a story about that, I think. You just said you were up all night or something, or
Yeah,
maybe you had a hangover or something, and you just took the picture.
those days are long gone, Stephen. It's really bad as an author when you have we're lucky enough to have long careers, but you can see yourself age by looking at
Oh,
your
I know.
photo.
That's terrible, isn't it? Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be the author photo. Anybody can go online and Google
Yeah,
John Grisham, and there's this photo gallery, and you can go through there, and it's like time lapse photography. You can see somebody grow older before your eyes.
all right.
But
I got
we
a
got
question.
one thing going for us, John. We're not movie actors. They end up, you know, the big stars end up in the character parts, and
Yeah,
we're still, grace of God, able to do what we do.
we don't have to retire. It's not a real job. They can't force us to retire. You can write until you die. I mean, I plan to. I can't imagine retiring.
I can't really imagine it. I'm not sure what I'd do for those hours between 8 and 12. And you know, we haven't even really talked about coronavirus and the reason why we're doing this not in person, but you know, in different locales. But that writing, I don't know about you, you can tell me, but those 4 hours, I go away to my own world, and I really love it.
It's been a wonderful diversion. I mean, it's what I've done for 30 years. I still get up early and go over there around 7 o'clock, and I love the first couple 3 hours. My office is dark and quiet, and nobody's around, and it's. I mean, I did this morning. I was in the office at 7 this morning. I wrote for 3.5 hours, and it's still very enjoyable. We're lucky to be doing what we're doing. I got to
Yeah.
take a question from the crowd, Stephen.
Okay, go for it.
Have you two ever discussed a collaboration?
Well, I told you when we were preparing to do this that anytime that you're ready, I'm ready to do it. And my idea would be to combine, you know, it would be something like the Vampire Legal Aid Society.
Yeah,
I can see your face. Everybody in America can see your face.
I'm afraid to collaborate with you because of a true story. We were in New York City probably 15 years ago with Pat Conroy and Peter Straub doing a fundraiser for a well-known audio reader. What was his name? Frank
Frank Muller.
Frank Muller.
Had a motorcycle accident.
Yeah, he got hurt in a motorcycle
Yeah.
accident, and you put it together. We raised a bunch of money for him. So we were on Broadway. We were actually in a Broadway theater
It's
that night.
incredible, wasn't it? Yeah.
And I asked Peter, I said, you and Steve collaborated on several books, didn't you? And he said, yeah. And I said, what was it like? He said, it was terrible. He said, he's a bad collaborator. I said, why? And he said, well, he works so fast. It would take Peter a couple, 3 weeks to write a chapter. He would send it to you. By return mail, he would get your next chapter with, some strong language about hurry up, you're writing too slow. And you just berated the poor guy.
I never said that to Peter.
That's what Peter said.
Peter's a gem. I would never say that to him.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can collaborate, Steve. Have you collaborated with anybody else lately?
Yeah, I've collaborated on a couple of short stories with my son Joe. One of them became a Netflix movie called In the Tall Grass. And I collaborated on a long novel, one of those doorstops, with my son Owen called Sleeping Beauties. It's one of my favorite books, actually. And working with the two boys was really interesting because Joe writes like me, and Owen writes like his mom, Tabby, who's written 7 books that are fabulous. But he has a sense of humor that's just wicked. So we had a great time with that book. It was a book about what would happen. Owen swears that I had this idea, but it wasn't me, it was him. What if all the women in the world fell asleep and men had to take care of themselves? And we had a blast writing the story, and he's very, very funny and very sharp. So it was good. What about you? Have you not collaborated? Theodore Boone, they're yours.
No, Theodore Boone is kind of a family project in that the 4 of us, Renee and our 2 kids, this has been going on for about 10 years now. We will discuss an idea for Theo. After 7 adventures, it's time for another one. We will kick around ideas. Renee reads everything, as initially and edits. The last book I wrote, Theodore, The Accomplice, in each book I have a funny scene that takes place in animal court where Theo, who's 13 years old, thinks he's a lawyer, goes into animal court, which is there's no such thing as animal court. But the case involves somebody's animal, their pet snake or their dog or their whatever. And we've had a lot of fun coming up with the animals. And I was in a bind, I was in a hurry, I missed the deadline. And I got with Ty, my son, who's a lawyer here in Charlottesville. I said, all right, I want you to write the animal court scene this weekend. Get it done, do a rough draft. Here's the animal I think we'll use. So he did that, did a good job. I got it back, polished it up. Ty and I have written a screenplay based on the first Theo book that went nowhere. So the whole family gets involved with the Theo books to some extent. They read them, they proof them, they give me ideas. Shay found a hilarious YouTube video one night about a spitting llama. And it's hilarious. And so she sent it to me. She said, this is your next animal for Animal Court. One time she sent me another YouTube video of the fainting goats. Have you heard of fainting goats?
Yes, I have.
Okay. It's hilarious to watch the video. The goats actually faint for about 10 seconds if they're scared, and they get up and run around. And it's fun to terrorize them, I guess. I don't know, but that's what happened in the book. So the family's always pitching in with the Theo books. So I guess that's collaboration.
Sure, it is. It is. When you were talking about the fainting goats, I was thinking about down here. I have a dog, Molly, also known as the Thing of Evil. And I'm Florida for the winter, and everybody assumes that Florida is always warm. Well, sometimes it can get pretty cold. It can get down in the 40s or even into the 30s. And on those days when it's really crisp, Molly and I like to go out and watch the lizards fall out of the trees because they get cold and they go into hibernation and they just fall. It's like a rain of lizards. So call me crazy.
Do a video for YouTube. I'd like to see that.
I should, yeah. I should
falling lizards.
YouTube.
Here's a question, Stephen.
Okay.
Has your writing process changed over the years?
Well, we talked about that a little bit. It has changed in the sense that I don't write as much as I used to. When you were talking about Talisman, collaborating with Peter Straub. Man, I was on fire during that, and I did. There were days when I would write 6,000 words. Just pouring right out, and I'm not that way anymore. So uh, it's slower, and the computer has changed a lot of things. Yeah, you and I both remember starting with the typewriter.
Yeah.
You must have written your early books on typewriters, yeah?
Well, A Time to Kill was written on legal pads and handwriting over a 3-year period when I was a lawyer and didn't have much time to write. I always kept the current legal pad in my briefcase, and if I
Right.
had 30 minutes waiting on a judge or wasting time in court or whatever, I'd sneak off to the jury deliberation room or to the law library, wherever I was, and I'd try to write. That went on for 3 years. So the whole thing is in I wouldn't call it longhand. It's tight block letters because my handwriting is so bad.
Where is it?
It's at the library at Mississippi State. Mississippi State collects all of my stuff. They asked me with A Time to Kill early on if they could be the official repository for all of my papers, and
Hmm.
and I had no idea what they were talking about. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, for all of your literary, legislative, and legal papers, don't throw away anything. Give it to us. And boy,
Wow.
they regretted that because I've sent them boxes and boxes and tons of stuff. They do a great job of cataloging, a million foreign editions, all the old manuscripts. Halfway through The Firm, which was about 1988, 89, I guess. No, 89 or 90. I was about halfway through. I bought one of the first generation early Olivetti word processors with a tiny screen so you could actually see what you had typed, and you could go back and edit and change and all that without your typewriter making.
Right, yeah.
So I finished the second half of The Firm with that machine and kept upgrading machines over the years. So I cannot imagine writing in longhand after all these years, and my handwriting is just deteriorated. But your first book was hammered out on an old typewriter, right?
Yeah, I was. It was on my wife's Olivetti typewriter, as a matter of fact. She likes to kid people and say, uh, Steve married me for my typewriter. Uh, I didn't. She had other wonderful attributes and still does. Physical, mental, and spiritual wonderful attributes. I love my wife just absolutely to death. And she's been my biggest supporter over the years, but she had a wonderful typewriter. And I, I hammered on that thing so much that you could see the shapes of my fingernails on some of the keys. And Carrie got published. Carrie was written on that Olivetti, and Salem's Lot, the second book, was written on that same Olivetti. And then one day, I came home from doing errands with a couple of the kids. We were living in Western Maine at that time. And there was this big, heavy box on the doorstep, and it was from my publisher. And I couldn't imagine what it was. And I opened it up. It was an IBM Selectric typewriter with correct tape. You put a little correct tape in, and when you backspaced, it sucked up the misspelling. You didn't need to do the little
Right.
XXXXX through it that you used to on typewriters. So that was the greatest innovation up to that point. And then my wife, my biggest supporter, that wonderful woman, started teasing me about you ought to get a computer. Oh, I don't want a computer. Blah, 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 blah. Well, you ought to. And finally, she persuaded me to get a computer to write on. And then I used to complain to her about, well, I have to learn this whole new system and I'm trying to write stories and blah, blah, blah. And she's just like, yes, dear, yes, dear. And then now I wouldn't give it up. So she was right. But I want to show you something, John, because you were talking about the legal pads. This is what I do when I'm bored or when I have some extra time. I work a little bit in this composition book, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. But I always feel like, well, it's terrible. I can always, not use it.
So what do you put in the composition book?
It's got various segments when I couldn't get to a computer, like if I was like waiting to get the car serviced or something, sitting in a waiting room where they are, I would, if I had my choice between Fox News and writing something in the composition book, I always chose the composition book. Let's see some of these other questions. Here's a good one. How will the COVID-19 pandemic affect what people read? Will it turn people away from stories of death and evil?
No, I
I
don't think
don't think
so.
so either.
There's always going to be a huge desire to read those types of stories. It's probably going to create a whole new subgenre of books about plagues and contagions and pandemics, and you can just see that coming in the next 12 months in publishing,
Mhm.
which is fine. We always react to live events, real events. Most of us do, but I don't think it's. I think it's going to help reading. I think it's going to benefit people like us who write. Eventually, it will help bookstores and publishers, and people are you know, clamoring for books right now. They just can't get them that easily,
Mhm.
like they used to. They can't go to the store, not all the
Yeah.
stores. But I think people are going to read. Steve, to be you know this. You published last week. I'm publishing this week, and the industry's watching those two books to see what's going to happen. Is
I
it
think that's true. I
is
think
it,
that
is it going to be a disaster? I don't think so. I'm sure the numbers will be down, but there's a lot of demand.
I've seen numbers. I've seen numbers, and the numbers are down in some places, but they're up in other places. There are places where people can get books
Right.
that are not dedicated bookstores, places like Walmart that are open because they're considered necessary services. I mean, they're the only people that have got toilet paper down here. So people go there, and the sales at some of those chains, Sam's Club and Walmart and things like that, they're up. They're good. They're pretty strong. So people do. You're right. People do want to read. I'll tell you a funny thing. This book that I was working on that I talked about, The Assassin. Um, I always assumed when I started writing this last year that it would be set in the year 2020. And 2020 came and everything was all right. And then boom, everything stopped. Everything stopped cold. And I looked at this manuscript that I was working on, and I had these two minor characters that lived in an apartment house. And for reasons of the plot, I had to get them out. So I sent them on a cruise. Okay. And then I thought to myself, that presents a serious problem because those cruise ships really is sort of like petri dishes. So I just took everything and I set it back a year. I set it back in the year 2019. I don't know what people are going to write about. They're going to have to deal with that. I guess they'll write novels about love in the time of plague, right? Or death in the time of coronavirus.
What are you reading?
Let's see, I'm reading a John Sanford book right now called Masked Prey. What are you reading?
My project for the pandemic was to read all 6 novels by Walker Percy in order, and I'm doing that. That's more of a literary challenge. Great writer, but you cannot read him fast. It's slow going. I just finished a book by Harlan Coben's latest. I always like Ian Rankin,
The
and
Boy from the Woods. I read The Boy from the Woods. I liked it.
yeah,
Yeah, I liked him a lot.
always like James Lee Burke. Some of the usual Michael Connolly. I heard Scott Turow comes out next week. I
Yeah,
always get Scott's books when he publishes. So I'm buying a lot of books to support my local store, so they're stacking up. I had big
sure.
plans to read, although at times with the quarantine, the virus, the pandemic, it's easy to write in the morning because you're really working to divert yourself and to finish a project.
Right.
I'm having trouble sometimes reading. I get diverted easily, and I'll hear some more bad news. And how about you? Is it bothering you like that?
Yeah, I have a tendency to look at the newspaper in the morning, and then I try to stay away from the cable news and the financial stuff and everything that has to do, with the same spin
Right.
cycle over and over again. I read a book. You know how you feel sorry sometimes when a book ends? I read a novel uh, by Sarah Lotz, Lotz, called Missing Person. And that's one of those books, she sort of married a story about internet groups that search for missing people and dead bodies and that sort of thing. She married that to an Agatha Christie mystery story, and it worked. and I just love the characters. I like stories about people who have strong bonds of friendship, and that had that for me. So I enjoyed that book very much, and I'm enjoying the John Sanford. There are writers that you read because they're dependable. You know that when you get them, you're going to get a good story. I think that's one of the reasons that we've had some success.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. A very serious question from me, not from the audience. How are you handling in April life with no baseball?
You know, for a while I'll go along and everything will seem cool, and then I'll say to myself, I'm missing a big part of my life, and the baseball was important to me. I like watching it. I like talking about it. But the best thing, John, was it was a connection with my younger son, Owen. Joe and I talk about books and stories all the time. Uh, and that's a great thing. And he's always talking about stuff that he's seen on TV or things that I should watch and all that. But Owen and I would talk about baseball. We're big Red Sox fans, have been since forever. And, you know, when I saw one of the tech guys that was putting this together in a Yankee hat, I just wanted to go like, get away. So I miss it. I miss it. And here's a serious question for you that has to do with baseball. How do you feel about watching baseball games played in empty stadiums?
Steve, right now I would enjoy watching a game from the Japanese minor leagues. I don't care. I'd love to watch some baseball. I have a little league park I built around the corner around the road from my house, my farm. I have 7 fields, between 400 and 500 kids every year, from t-ball to baseball, 15-year-old baseball to softball. And it's been there for 25 years. It's a beautiful ballpark. I'm still the commissioner because nobody else wants to be the commissioner. I'm still the owner because I can't give it away. But the ballpark is empty. We've had a beautiful warm spring here in Central Virginia, and the ballpark is empty. And there are a lot of kids who need to be playing. I follow college baseball. I know you're a big Maine Black Bear fan. We've had that conversation before, and
Yeah.
it's fun to follow college baseball. And then your Red Sox and my Cardinals are not playing, and it's just
John, we are so much alike. 25 years ago, I built a ballpark in Bangor, Maine, Mansfield Complex. Same time period as you, and it it's not a little league park. It's for senior league, and
right.
the senior league World Series has been played there for years. People come up and they ooh and ah about how nice the field is. Kids like to play under the lights because they can play at night. There's lights and an electronic scoreboard. It doesn't throw off fireworks or anything like that, but it's a beautiful thing, and it's empty. This year it's totally empty. And the thing is, I don't know about your fields, but at Mansfield, it has never looked better because the weather has been good, and because the groundskeepers come out. They're local dads that come out and they water the field, and they do all the stuff. They refresh the sod and everything. So it looks great. All it needs is kids to play on it.
Yeah.
Bummer, man.
Baseball has survived everything: wars, depressions, recessions. We've always had it, and it's generational. My father was a huge Cardinal fan. His hero was Dizzy Dean. Stan Musial. My grandfather was Dizzy Dean. It goes back to when I was a kid, growing up in Arkansas and Mississippi, and the Cardinal game was on the radio every night. We knew every game, every player, every stat, and we would replay those games the next day on the sandlots as kids. That was life back then, and it's just really it's really bizarre.
It was the soundtrack of summer, wasn't it?
Yeah,
That was it.
Steve, we used to play Little League baseball games at our local park there, and there would be a radio in the dugout. We'd listen to the Cardinal. One of the coaches would listen to the Cardinal game. There would be 3 or 4 radios, transistors in the bleachers with the Cardinal game. Jack Buck and Harry Carey out of St. Louis. You always knew who they were playing, what the score was, what inning it was. That was just common knowledge. Everybody knew that.
Yeah.
And if you were in a car, it was on the radio. If you were at home, it was on the radio before we had, cable TV. But that was so much a part of growing up. And
Well, I mean, the thing is, for guys like us, I mean, maybe we lost 200 people because people are just not baseball fans. But I'm not sure what's going to happen, frankly, with football, pro football this year either. I mean, down here, man, in the part of Florida where I live, they're crazy about the Tampa Bay Bucks having picked up Tom Brady, and they've got Rob Gronkowski, who came along with him. It's like the reuniting of those two people. They're crazy about it. They write about it all the time. They talk about it on TV when they're not talking about coronavirus, but I'm not sure they're going to play. There's no golf. There's no NASCAR this year. There's a big hole in people's lives, and that's only, the start of it. Movies are shut down. I got such movie deprivation. You can only watch so much Netflix, man.
Yeah, they're not filming. Netflix and HBO have plenty of money, but they're not filming, and who knows what's going to happen. How many? Do you have a movie or a series planned for next year based on your books?
We were 24 days from finishing principal photography on Lisi's story in New York. We were filming at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and every day that went by, I thought we're a day closer to being done. And they shut us down. They had to. Everything got shut down. And we want to protect lives. We want to keep people healthy as much as we can. So it's sitting there. There are terrific sets in warehouses. The sets are so big that, they had to be in warehouses. And so far as I know, they're just sitting there. And at some point, production will resume, presumably on everything. But right now, pretty much everything is shut down, and I think that some of the theaters may not come back. I mean, for bookstores, we have a product, right, that we can sell, and people can buy books from their independent bookstore, which I would prefer to that big giant with the smile logo. I think the independents, I root for them. The big company with the smile logo is okay. They sell a lot of books, but movies, you can't get curbside service with a summer blockbuster.
Yeah. In the past 5 years, you've had a real resurgence with TV and film. How do you explain that?
I think it all had to do with the clown. I think that 50 years from now, people may not remember who Stephen King was, but they will remember Pennywise the Clown. And the success of that movie was kind of a surprise to Hollywood. It was certainly a surprise to me. I knew it was a good movie, but I had no idea that it would do the kind of box office numbers that it did, almost $1 billion. And I think that, how they say a rising tide lifts all boats. So I think a lot of other things got made. And the other thing, this for yourself, the streaming services, they're just crazy for content. They're like an endless machine that wants content. So a lot of those places have bought stuff.
What was your last cameo?
Well, I did the bookstore, a junk store owner in the second part of it. Now, have you done cameos yourself?
I cannot act. You can act. I can't act.
Well, no, I can't act.
You're such a great actor, Steve, and we want to see more of you on screen.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. We're getting toward the end. What else would you like to say that we haven't said? We've answered a lot of these questions that the readers came in.
Question for you. We both published this week and last week here in April. When do you publish again?
Well, I don't have anything on the schedule. Actually, it's funny you were talking about writing fast. I do have a medium-length novel that might get published next year. Maybe as a paperback original. It's a suspense story with a supernatural twist. What about you? You've got one already done. Come on, admit it.
No, I'm getting close. I mean, I start every year on January the 1st, a legal thriller, and the goal is to finish by July the 1st, so 6 months. And I'm usually on time. So, the big change now is there's no travel. Normally I'll take off a week, it would do this or whatever, go to a book festival. We canceled 6 or 7 trips so far this year, and none are planned. So I'm home all the time, and plenty of time to write. I'm writing a sort of a sequel to A Time to Kill, a book set back in Ford County. I may have mentioned that. But I'm ahead of schedule, although the book's getting pretty thick. I'm not sure if I can get to the end anytime soon, but I'm just writing, and it'll come out in October.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the thing about sheltering in place is I have no more excuses.
yeah, yeah, you got
Sit
to
down
write.
every day and do it, and the pages pile up, which is great.
Yeah, we're lucky to be able to do that.
We are very lucky to be able to do that. We absolutely are. And any last comments? Anything that you want to say?
No, it's great seeing you. It's your turn to come see me. I went to see you in Sarasota about 3 years ago for your library. Had a great time down there.
We
Spent
did.
the night with you and Tabby. You've been to Charlottesville. You've been to Oxford 25 years ago, and so it's
We went low riding in Oxford. You remember?
Stephen called me. Great story when the firm came out in '91. It was a bestseller, and I got a note one day from Bangor, Maine. It was from Stephen King, and he said, "Hey, I love the firm. Welcome to the big leagues." And I thought that was pretty classy, and so I invited Steve to come to the book festival in Oxford. I think spring of '94.
Yep.
And Steve said, "Do you have a pickup truck?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I would love to go low riding in a pickup truck and find some rednecks." I said, he
Did
said,
I use that word, rednecks?
he said, "I would like to observe some real rednecks." And I said, "Well, I can probably find you some around here." And you came, and we had a wonderful event on the campus at Ole Miss, and we went riding around in my pickup truck, looking at some of the native peoples down there, and we had a wonderful visit.
Yeah, we did. We did. And this has been a wonderful visit.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Let's do it again. Let's get together.
Let's do it again.
We're not getting younger, Stephen.
Pardon me?
We're not getting younger.
No, we're not getting any younger, but we look good. We look good for our age. You do anyway. And we hope that people will click on that hyperlink and give to, let me say it one more time. It's
The link to Bink.
The Bink. Yeah, and what is it? It's called the Booksellers Industry, what? Industry Charitable Foundation. Bink.
Yep.
Give some money, buy books from independent bookstores, buy books, read books. So you take care of yourself, John.
Take care, Steve. See you soon. Enjoyed it.
You bet. You too.